retirement community. And they're taking good care of me, feeding me well, the food's good. So sort of made my last permanent move.
There we go. I had lunch with David Brickley and some folks up at a little Greek place down on King Street several weeks ago. It was really good. But yeah, I love Old Town.
Well, King Street is very interesting, and I'm going to try some of those restaurants in Old Town. Yeah.
Good.
I hate to interrupt the lively conversation, but I think it's time to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to the November, 16th? 18th. Oh, well, being retired, I don't look at my calendar frequently. Welcome to all, and I hope everyone who is out there virtually is having a good day. We've had conversation here and have had that also. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting. I'd also like to, before we get too far involved, like to announce a new member of the staff here at Plan RVA, Roshonda Lanier Jackson, who is she online?
She's not. No,
she's not here, but you'll have the pleasure of meeting her later. She's going to be involved in public outreach and communications for Plan RVA. So we welcome her to the group. Let us stand, if we may, to pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just a brief statement about the ongoing virtual meetings. This is referred to as a hybrid meeting, where those of you who would like to meet in person are invited to populate the table around here. And if you do, you will get a scrumptious lunch to include these little tiny cookies. So if that might invite some of you to visit, I would invite you to come and enjoy the cookies. So anyhow, that's not about that. We do meet both virtually, so you can meet online as well as here. I think that's the way of the future. So welcome to you all. Janice, if you would call the roll call, please, ma'am.
Certainly. Town of Ashland, Chair Martin.
Present.
How you doing? Chesterfield County, Ms. Beals. Mr. Richwine. I believe he may be attending by Zoom, but there's someone here that I haven't been able to move over to panelist, so he may not be able to talk with us, but I know he's planning to attend.
We'll hear about his attendance. Yes.
Ms. Jordan. Goochland County, Mr. Basham. Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick. Henrico County, Ms. Lancaster. Here. Duquesne County, Vice Chair Guthrie. Here. Mr. Moyer. Powhatan County, Mr. Powers.
Here.
Thank you. City of Richmond, Ms. Erickson. Mr. Hill. Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter. Mr. Mayman. NAACP, Mr. Minor. Mr. Johnson. League of Women Voters, Ms. Liziger. Here. Ms. Rosenblum. Richmond Area Bicycling Association. Burnley.
Here virtually.
Thank you. Virginia Association of Railway Patrons, Mr. Testerman.
Here.
Virginia Conservation Network, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Fisher.
Here.
Thank you. And Virginia Commonwealth University, Mr. Leonard. Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. Do appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, it looks like Ms. Beals is attending remotely. If you wanted to promote her as a panelist.
All right, certainly.
Be able to look at the rest of the attendance and see if there's anybody else.
Thank you, Chip.
I'm gonna do it again, but I had tried to bring her over before, and I also have, let's see, 1 second. Miss Jordan, in attendance, and I'll promote her to panelist as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome to all of you who are out there virtually. We will certainly, if you have comments throughout the meeting, you can enter it, either raise your hand, which sometimes doesn't work, or put it into your chat, and Janice will inform us that there's questions or comments or whatever, but welcome everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome Virginia Cowles to us. Virginia, I think you were out there. Hi, Virginia. We missed you.
I am right here.
No, I see you. I understand, I was not able to chair the committee meeting in September, but there was a very nice resolution read into the minutes congratulating you. And since you were not here, I thought I'd take the pleasure of doing that. It is simply a very small token of our esteem and thanks for your years of service. And I will tell you that we miss seeing you and your participation around the table, but you have a very fine replacement, substitute, whatever you want to call it. So here's the resolution, Virginia. Virginia Cowles, for her service to the Citizens/Community Transportation Advisory Committee of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Whereas Virginia Cowles has served as one of the League of Women Voters' alternate and primary responsibilities to the TPO's Citizens Community Transportation Advisory Committee from July 2006 to July 2021. And whereas Virginia Cowles, during her tenure as CTAC alternate and primary representative, represented to the best of her ability the interest of CTAC and the citizens of the Richmond area. And whereas we, the members of CTAC, wish to express our sincere appreciation to Virginia Cowles, now therefore be it resolved that the TPO Community Transportation Advisory Committee does hereby express its sincere appreciation and gratitude. And this was read into last month's meeting, so it was on the 16th day of September 2021, to Virginia Cowles for her leadership and outstanding service to the TPO Community Transportation Advisory Committee. Thank you, Virginia.
Well, Virginia Cowles is honored to have served the CTAC for the League of Women Voters. It was a great learning experience. I learned things that I would never have found in the local newspaper. I know that transportation issues are a difficult sell, and I hope you'll have a good fortune in getting more public participation in transportation planning.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you. You know that these meetings are open to the public, and we would invite you, encourage you, and look forward to having you participate as a citizen in the future.
Well, thank you. I might do that.
Well, we hope so. And happy holidays to you.
Thank you. Thank
Take
you.
care, Virginia.
She can stay on if she likes.
Our vice chair invites you to stay on as long as you would like. So you don't have to go off. You can continue to stay on.
I appreciate that, and I will.
Great. Good. Great. The next item on our agenda is consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda. The agenda was presented out there to everyone. Does anyone have additions to the agenda for the 18th meeting? None, we will move forward. The next item is approval of the September 16th, 2021 CTAC meeting minutes. There is one correction that some of us, beyond the spelling, that some of us heard, and that was that Herbert Richwine was indeed participating via phone to that meeting. And we encourage you, Herbert, to continue to do that.
And Mr. Chair, we did have an additional amendment, and that is under the new business, item B2, the report on the automated driving system project. The third line down should be Dr. Walker instead of Dr. Martin. And we will make that change to the minutes.
Thank you. I also am one with the name Upton Martin. Is so often referred to as Mr. Upton and whatever, so I certainly understand. But anyhow, okay, let's move on. I guess I need a motion to that extent. Would someone move that we accept the agenda? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All otherwise say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Fourth is filling of CTAC vacancies and EDAC membership. And I think Mr. Lance will talk towards the CTAC vacancies.
Yes, sir. One of the things that we have been doing since our last meeting is we have sent out letters to our TPO policy board representatives, as well as the executive officers in each of the jurisdictions, indicating that, your particular jurisdiction has a vacancy or vacancies amongst CTAC as in terms of your primary and or your alternate representatives. And I think every jurisdiction got one of those with the exception of New Kent. New Kent has a designated representative and an alternate. But all of the other jurisdictions had at least one alternate or one representative that they were short. So these have gone out. I don't know that we've gotten any responses yet, have we, Janice?
No formal responses, but the city of Richmond has reached out to make sure they have a good understanding of what they need, who they need to appoint, how many appointees. So they are working on it.
Yeah, we're starting to get some inquiries about, this. So we're hopeful that in the coming months, we'll be getting some additional individuals around the table here. So we'll be up to full strength, at least as far as the jurisdictional representatives. Have not moved forward on the issue of bringing the EDAC membership in yet. I was just focusing this past month on getting these letters out. But I hope that we'll be getting some additional folks on board here before long.
Just to bring some of the new members up to snuff on EDAC, there was at one time a committee called the Elderly and Disabled Advisory Committee, just like CTAC. And it was composed of exactly that, elderly and disabled folks, and was supposed to be that group's access to advising the TPO in regards to transportation issues, bus stops, pedestrian, bicycling, et cetera. There seemed to be an issue of attendance, so that committee was disbanded. However, at that same time, this body decided that that was a very important voice that needed to be brought to the table. So we basically considered ourselves at some point to look at the membership of EDAC, not necessarily members themselves, but groups that were represented, and to the extent possible enfold them back into this committee, the Community Transportation Advisory Committee. That would entail, we think, Lisa and I and Ken have talked about that, perhaps creating an ad hoc committee that would look at the universe that needs to be represented by the old EDAC committee and making recommendations as to how we would appropriately involve them in this committee. If that entails increasing the membership of the CTAC, then the bylaws would have to be changed at the TPO level. But they have indicated a real willingness to do that. There's no problem with that. So basically, I'm sort of reaching out to the universe out here. If anyone would like to be involved in that EDAC adjunct committee, ad hoc committee, let either myself or Ken know, and we'll get that moving forward. Lisa and I are sort of committed to having that done within either my or her chairmanship. So we've got some time to do that, but it's something that needs to be done and we think is of great importance. So let either myself or Ken know of your willingness to serve. Otherwise, your chairman will reach out and put a little pressure on you. I don't know how I'm going to do that. Maybe taking away your cooking lunch, but anyhow. Any questions, any comments in regards to EDAC? Seeing none, we'll move on. Next item is the open public comments. Anything out in chat, Janice? Anything we've had before?
No.
Okay.
Nothing in the chat.
All right. There being no public comments, we'll move on to my chairman's report. First thing I'd like to do is thank Lisa Guthrie for taking over for me in September. Reading the minutes would reflect that she had a busy meeting, and thank you very much. I would say that
places next time.
yeah, I would say that's practice, but we've both done this before, so you certainly don't need any practice. The only other thing I'll comment is I had the pleasure of attending the Transportation Symposium out at Goochland, the golf course out there, and I invited, it was Powhatan. Yeah, Powhatan, sorry, it was Powhatan. Go through Goochland, then you hit Powhatan. Henrico, Powhatan, Goochland are about like that. You get out there. Anyhow, it was a good meeting, very informative meeting. And it was great to hear comments from a lot of different sources. So if you have an opportunity, if you have time to attend these symposiums and other outreach types of transportation meetings, I encourage you all to do so.
It's online. I went back and watched it, even though I couldn't attend. I did watch it. So it's on their YouTube site.
If you didn't hear, Lisa says that symposium is out there online. So if you'd like to pull it up, do you remember how you got to it?
Through the Plain RVA.
It's a link to.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send everyone a link.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Janice is going to send everybody a link to that if you want to review it. Okay.
Upton, who was the sponsor or host? Us.
Yeah. The
TPO.
Oh, okay. We've generally rotated these symposiums around to the jurisdiction of each TPO chair. And currently our chair is David Williams from Powhatan. So for that reason, it was held at the Independence Golf Course in Powhatan. It's been in Hanover. We've had it in Ashland. Henrico.
Main Street Station.
Yeah.
So it's very informative. So if you have an opportunity, I encourage you all to take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, Chet, RRTPO updates, please, sir.
Sure, I'm going to share my screen in your packet, and in the agenda for this clicking along at home is a memorandum, a summary report that Ken prepares, talking about the actions and discussions taking place at the policy board and the TAC meetings. So this reflects October and November meetings. There was a tip amendment to do an interchange justification report for Route 288, and also to add a project looking at 288 from Broad Street to Tuckahoe Creek Parkway in Goochland. There was another tip amendment VDOT request for I-64 westbound and Parham Road interchange improvements. GRTC requested and received support for a funding application through the TRIP program that DRPT, our state partners, sponsor, and got the support for their application from the policy board. I think the big news, October 4th, we got our long-range plan adopted. Connect RBA 2045. So that is now updated to the Plan RBA website, and it is. We're working on some ways now to make it more accessible for anyone in the community. We're looking at a citizens guide and possibly some other online ways of viewing and interacting with the contents of the plan. So look for that over the next few months. Tiffany, who's online with us today, gave an update on the Transit Equity and Modernization Study. We had an overview of Smart Scale. The next round starts next year in 2022, round 5. And Brooke Jackson from the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment gave a briefing on round 5 improvements to the TAC. I would encourage anyone who has any interest in transportation projects or funding through the state to go back to our website and view that presentation. It's super informative, and I think we were the first update that VDOT gave across the state in terms of what they're looking at for round 5. So very timely, very informative, especially with everything that's going on in the region these days. And then the next section there is the current work efforts update. I mentioned the long-range plan, the Ashland Trolley Line study, and the regional bike ped plan update are both well underway. We are now looking at a completion adoption date. We're targeting probably May of 2022 for the bike ped plan update. And between now and then, there will be a draft put out and some extensive public engagement to be a part of and to promote with your constituents. So be on the lookout for that. And I think that's it, Mr. Chair, for the update.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Any questions in regards to the presentation, the RRTPO updates to Chet? Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Chet. Okay. New business, Tiffany Dubinsky is online with us. Hi, Tiffany. And she's going to talk to us about Virginia Transit Equity and Modernization Study. Thank you, Tiffany. Go right ahead, please.
Give me one moment to go ahead and make sure this starts. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I always say that because I've had mixed results with technology over the past 21 months now. So thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity today to present on DRPT's Transit Equity and Modernization Study. My name is Tiffany Dubinsky. I am one of our statewide transit planning managers out of our Richmond office. And for those of you who have been around with CTAC when it was how I remember it as Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, you are also familiar with me from my time with the CTO. What I'd like to do today is provide an overview of what we are doing with this study, and then to provide a little bit of an update. So this is actually even different than what I presented to the Technical Advisory Committee at the last meeting that Chet just covered. So we have a little bit more information that I'll be glad to share. At the end of this, we are looking for ways of engagement to get input from the public. So we have some opportunities for you all to be able to get more involved as we kind of head into the next year of the study. So for a study overview, how and why are we doing this study? So this initiated based off of House Bill 542. This resolution required DRPT to explore a variety of topics that will create recommendations to better equitable transit and forward modernization, hence equity and modernization as the title. We are emphasizing engagement opportunities for underrepresented communities, and our focus is really on 6 topic areas that are highlighted on the screen. So we're looking at transit accessibility, adequacy of infrastructure, transit electrification, emerging technologies, transit safety, and system engagement and governance. In particular, we're hoping that this will help us figure out a restorative approach to transit service so that we can improve the quality of life for people throughout the Commonwealth. So our study goals, what we're looking to hope to accomplish with this study, we're hoping to identify transit agency, rider, and stakeholder needs. There is an action plan that we will be developing out of this study to address all those needs that we identify. And in particular, make sure that we are clearly defining our underrepresented and underserved communities. We are very clear that this is not going to be a study that is an asset inventory. So we are not going out to record every bus stop or bench that's existing in the Commonwealth. And we are not trying to single out transit agencies for any kind of negative information. So whether they have poor performance, below standard conditions and so forth. We're not trying to be punitive in terms of what we're doing with the study and its goals. My apologies. So thinking a little bit further about what we're trying to address. So we are looking at opportunities or gap assessment of transit service. Also with looking at what kind of needs and barriers are there in terms of improving transit infrastructure. Looking forward at how we can reduce carbon footprint through electrification. And in particular, it's just the electrification of our transit vehicles and fleet. We're also thinking about strategies to inform priorities in terms of how we're implementing some of the emerging technologies. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of emerging technologies. And then finally, thinking of a framework for identifying and engaging disadvantaged populations and underserved communities. We're kind of clear in that, the purpose of this study is not only for us as DRT as a state agency, but also thinking of ways that this study can also be a resource for a lot of our transit agencies and partners who are looking for better ways to improve their own services in their areas. So looking ahead at our study schedule, this is probably the busiest slide that I have, and if it's an indication of what we've been working on, I think that's not busy enough. So we started this effort technically in the summer, doing a lot of data collection and initial work. And then moving into the fall, we have been working through some of our focus groups which had rider and community organizers input. We did also start convening what we are calling technical working groups, as well as the TEC, which is our Transit Equity Committee, which involves representatives from various transit agencies and organizations that have a vested interest in equity and modernization throughout the state. We did a presentation at the Virginia Transit Association conference that was in Tyson's Corner. So again, thank you to Lisa. That was an excellent first conference to come back to in person, where we had an opportunity to talk about the study and spread the word among a lot of our partners. And then as we have been moving into the fall, we have been continuing our work with our working groups with our first deliverable that is scheduled to be presented to the CTB in December. That is what we're calling our interim report. As we kind of look forward into 2022, we are looking to convene some additional meetings with our equity committee, as well as our working groups that I'll talk about a little bit later here. And then the aim of it is that we'll have a Transit Equity Day. I think it's tentatively scheduled right now for February. And then a virtual forum on the draft report before we have a final report delivered in roughly about June. I think our deadline based off the legislation is technically August, so we're trying to get ahead of that and to provide a little bit of cushion in case there's additional edits and feedback we need to incorporate. So here we are with study updates. Starting off with what we had initiated with our data collection. We sent out a transit agency survey. This was sent out to all of our roughly 39 agencies in the state right now. We did get 100% response rate, so we were very encouraged by that. It had about 42 questions covering all 6 of our topic areas. We also asked for any technical area data requests and then information on what our transit agencies are doing in terms of equity. We also asked from our transit agencies with that data collection request, anything related to their GIS layers or mapping, requirements in terms of their board structure and governance, any manuals or outreach plans related to either Title VI or public participation, information on their capital programs, how they're reporting and collecting data to the National Transit Database or NTD, and then Transam, which is our reporting mechanism for a lot of our transit assets. So, you know, the conditions of facilities as well as vehicles. Last, we did kind of a state agency data collection, looking at what was available at a state level to us as the agency. So whether that was statewide GIS layers, looking at standards, requirements, guidance that we have out for transit agencies, both internally and externally, fleet data, any Title VI plans, what we're calling our transit strategic plans, or our transit development plans, which are a requirement for all of our agencies to complete. And then PTASC, which is our Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. So I apologize, I realize how many acronyms I may be throwing, so I'll try to make sure I spell it out for you all as I go through. All of this data collection came together in terms of our baseline conditions and the needs assessment. That will be released and posted available to our study website after the beginning of this year, because it is folded into our interim report. So thinking a little bit forward about how we're identifying needs and opportunities, we're looking at what's currently existing and then also creating strategies that will improve these transit equity and modernization components in all communities. So when we did the data collection phase in the fall, the study kind of moved forward in building into these areas how we did this. So technical working groups, we had 6 topic areas, and they will meet including transit agency leaders as well as industry partners, roughly 4 times at key points throughout the study. And then, as I mentioned when I covered the timeline, there's the Transit Equity Committee. Those are mostly transit agency executives that provide an equity lens on findings. And then, as I mentioned, there are a series of memos that folded into our baseline conditions and needs assessment heading into the interim study that's due in December. So we've had a lot of moving pieces that kind of help, you know, inform the interim study so that we can then move on to looking at the latter half of the final report and the action plan. Related to community engagement, we mentioned how we had initial engagement focus groups. We had 7 different focus groups roughly in September that included riders, paratransit riders, rider advisory councils for those that did exist, and as well as community organizers. We did also launch our study website on September 20th so that there was an opportunity to provide information to the public on what the study was doing, as well as an opportunity to sign up for any updates as they are released. We also developed outreach kits, and that include rack cards, window clings for agencies to be able to spread the word on the study. We are also developing an open comment database. So that's allowing comments from the public through the website, and then we're able to collect that and be able to manage the comments as they're going through the development of the study. And as I mentioned in the timeline, we're working on a virtual public forum. Spring 2022 is probably a good, generous idea. We're still figuring out the timing based off of multiple schedules and being aware about General Assembly and requirements for our transit agencies. So kind of going into the focus groups, I think it was really helpful to be able to talk about these virtual small group discussions. As I mentioned before, we had members from that were frequent riders from our fixed route transit, so roughly about 16 participants. We also had infrequent riders, so those who were not constantly on transit, so that's 15. Stakeholders and rider advisory council members, roughly about 9 participants. And then paratransit and disabled non-riders, 8 participants. We convened these focus groups because we wanted to understand Virginia public transit users' attitudes towards what's going on in terms of our current transportation network, whether it was meeting their needs from an equity lens, and then reactions to our efforts, current and proposed, to modernize the system. So definitely getting that feedback and that gut check on what we were recommending. The online focus groups allowed our consultants to be able to draw from a larger geographic area as well, because participants were not asked to travel to the site. So we felt that we had higher levels of engagement by having a virtual forum. So roughly there were 48 total participants in focus groups, and they were held in group sizes that ranged from 3 to 9 people. So that there were 3 themes that kind of popped up in our focus groups. One was looking at upgraded infrastructure to enhance overall rider experience and help with safety concerns. One was a greater effort to seek out underrepresented and underserved voices through the use of incentives in virtual meetings. And then the third was a strong desire to explore and implement emerging technologies to protect the environment. So some takeaways, first looking under like infrastructure and accessibility related to our topic areas. Our focus group said that in terms of benefits, there's no need to drive or park. It provides an ability to do other things when you're traveling, so that multitasking component. And then a consensus of good maintenance of buses and stops currently. Some barriers and challenges that they highlighted were getting familiar with the system and having enough information to be able to navigate our current transit systems throughout the state. Safety, trip length, reliability, shelters without covered stops or lighting, crosswalks, any kind of standard amenities that you would expect connecting to your shelters and stops. Vehicle cleanliness, and then inconsistent ADA accessibility on buses and shelters. Related to emerging technology and electrification, some benefits included kind of a desire to move to more electric buses and to protect the environment as a result. And then the rider willingness to have higher fares for the buses. So we found that a lot of our respondents said that they would pay more if they were able to ride on more electric buses or vehicles, citing that there was less noise. Of course, there's less emissions and pollution. And they also felt that there was a higher level of cleanliness associated with electric buses. Some challenges and barriers related to that on the other side is that there were concerns about diesel bus emissions and air quality currently. The funding component, because there is a higher cost per vehicle when it comes to electric vehicles, and that electric buses still use resources from power plants, so they're not completely clean fuel in the perspective. So there's still room for improvement related to electric vehicles. Looking at transit safety, some benefits that were highlighted from the focus groups included a feeling that public transportation is still a safe mode of transportation, and that there's limited concern for vehicle safety when riding transit. Barriers include frequency at night causes crime-related concerns. That there's always a need to be aware of safety, especially if service is free. So there has been a lot of discussion about if you are riding on a system that has fare-free service, about those who will just ride on a vehicle from start to finish. There have been concerns about that. And then agencies and operators not enforcing COVID-19 requirements. And there's a desire to continue these enforcements post-pandemic. We will say that there has been a challenge in terms of the role of your drivers and operators on transit systems to navigate all the responsibilities, in addition to the core responsibility of driving their vehicle safely from start to finish. So enforcing masks and social distancing, and then other safety components related to COVID requirements has been a challenge for our agencies and operators to kind of figure out and enforce. Looking at system engagement and governance, agencies care about complaints, and they feel that there needs to be appropriate hierarchy and processes involved whenever you're receiving complaints from riders. There's also the benefit that virtual engagement has helped participation by having a little bit more flexibility for the general public to be able to either watch board meetings or be able to participate in a variety of mediums. The virtual engagement has allowed a little bit more of a relationship between the public and a lot of our transit agencies. Some barriers and challenges, however, include that underrepresented and underserved populations are not sought out for feedback. I feel that's kind of consistent in terms of what we deal with in transportation planning in general. We're trying to get the target populations that we know that would best benefit from some of these changes or improvements that we usually are talking about. They aren't available, or that maybe there isn't a way to properly reach out and get them involved. There's also a lack of incentive to attend public participation meetings. It's that time and opportunity cost that a lot of people weigh out versus attending, a 2-hour meeting from 4 to 6 on a weekday. There are lack of resources as well to make adequate change in view of some of our focus group respondents. And then there's unawareness of how to participate in whether it's rider advisory committees or input meetings. So even if you're aware about meetings that are happening, there isn't a way to really understand how do you get involved and how can you get engaged with your transit system through any of their advisory or public outreach meetings. Last, kind of looking at equity. So the perception is that agencies are not putting equity into practice. And there's a wonder of how and when equitable measures will be put into place. Barriers include housing prices higher around transit, but they are the most accessible, and then the perception of transit riders is negative. And that has not been any different from anyone's knowledge in terms of the investment in transit-oriented development, or just the perception about public transportation and where it goes. Last, there's a lack of collaboration with all types of people in the community. So there seems to be a lack of collaboration, whether it's on a local or regional level, and really thinking about public transportation and where the needs are in terms of services and operations. So looking at the transit survey, I'll try to kind of work through this because I know I'm taking longer than anticipated. So we had, like I mentioned before, full participation from our transit agencies. The survey was available from July 29th to September 1st. And the purpose was to get input from our agencies to help us figure out a baseline existing conditions and then identify some opportunities to help focus the development of the study. We looked at where funding needed to be implemented in terms of equitable improvements, a desire for technology to enhance service, and then increased written policy guidance that we needed surrounding equity. So some of the questions that we did ask, and a copy of this presentation was made available. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the pie charts and tables here. So in terms of defining equity in the context of transit service, most of our respondents said that there was a focus on people generators to ensure fair and equal access to routes, prioritizing accessible design, and then identifying gaps and needs in the current service. And we did ask some questions related about even if your agency had an equity policy that went beyond Title VI requirements. And you can see there is an astounding 82% said no, as well as the question here about rating your level of agreement if the transit service we provide is equitable. Most of our agencies simply said that they either agree or strongly agree. So it was an interesting input there. Thinking about accessibility and infrastructure, agencies track access to destinations via transit through whether it's census data, onboarding surveys, origin and destination studies, public engagement, and surveys. They do see that there's some implementation barriers that include like the inventory of infrastructure, funding to support transit expansion and connection, staff capacity, and then technology. In terms of a future strategy and interest, 46% said that they have an interest in service equity analysis related to accessibility and infrastructure. And then 19% of our agencies have implemented a zero fare transit program. Looking at electrification and technology, there was interest in both emerging and established technologies. So an example of established technologies are your automatic vehicle locators or computer-aided dispatch versus kind of the emerging technologies like a low-speed automated vehicle or an electric bus. 33% have said that they implemented something in terms of real-time travel information, so being able to look at either a display or your phone app to be able to tell when a bus is arriving to stop or where they are currently on the route. And 49% are interested or actively pursuing contactless fare payment. The question that we asked about how DRPT can help modernize transit, they highlighted three main points, which would be technical assistance and training, particularly for smaller urban or rural agencies, state contracts for a lot of procurement issues, and then grants and funding for technology and electric bus transitions. And then with safety, based off the survey findings, we found that common safety concerns include traveling to and from your facilities, and then the cleanliness of vehicles and facilities. There was a mention about coordination with VDOT in terms of making more efforts to have maybe monthly transit planning meetings or as on a needed basis. And then of course, working through the MPOs in order to kind of make that coordination stronger. Looking forward at engagement in governments, we made a concerted effort out of the survey to try to see how we better define underserved communities. We looked at poverty level, the FTA definition, as well as transit-dependent vulnerability factors. We found also that with some of the survey responses that in successful engagement tools included engagement with local housing agencies, pop-up outreaches, and then online students. So here we are, next steps. As I mentioned, we did just complete our baseline conditions memo that is being folded into the interim report, which we will hope to present in December. And then, as I mentioned before, again, we will have a final report in summer 2022. So right now we are currently on track to have this to stay on track for the study to the General Assembly. So lastly, I mentioned at the far beginning of my presentation, we would love to have your help. And in particular, we would love for you all to visit our website, which is vatransitequity.com. We'll be providing, like I mentioned at the beginning of the year, a major update, including the baseline conditions memo, all the information and input we got from focus groups and stakeholder meetings, as well as what we've been seeing in terms of technical memos for all of our topic areas. There is an ability to sign up for our email list so you can get information and updates as they are released at the website too. But in the interim, you can always reach out to any of your DRPT representatives. I am your main for the Richmond TPO, so my information is located there. And then Grant Sparks, who is the Director of Transit Planning, who is also the lead for the study, his contact information is there as well. And with that, I am done with my presentation. I would be glad to answer any questions.
Tiffany Champier, question?
Sure.
Yeah, you touched on it on some of the safety concerns, and I've heard anecdotally that one of the unintended consequences of free fare is that, like you said, teenagers are getting on board and just kind of joyriding on the buses and harassing people. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. What are some of the other localities doing to address this? We certainly want people to take advantage of the service, but you don't want to get harassed by people that are just hanging out on the bus, to party and be obnoxious. How can that be dealt with?
So I think it's a little tricky. So I know that here in Richmond, they had that issue early on when they started doing their fare-free program, especially with schools being out, a lot of younger teenagers riding it. So they actually increased, I think, fare enforcement officers on the vehicle, for example. And, basically from start to finish, if they were seeing that there were passengers not moving, they were encouraged to move off of it. It is hard to be able to enforce that because there is a tricky balance of risking discrimination in some ways in terms of those who are riding on a bus. But the benefits still outweigh the drawbacks in terms of fare free. So for those who are transit dependent and who have been reliant on transit, they have appreciated it. And the frequency has not been as much as you would anticipate. So it does help that school is back in session. So for those who are the teenagers who tended to ride on the vehicles, they also did think about restrictions on more of the late night hours versus the day. I think there was a higher frequency at that. But to kind of go back to your initial question, I don't think there's a really great strategy that we've identified yet. But we do still think that the benefits of fare free outweigh kind of the drawback of one or two people riding the bus all day.
There's a Tiffany, thank you. There's a question or comment that Lisa Guthrie has. Lisa?
Hi, Tiffany. I know that an issue has come up with GRTC's efforts to address equity through more enhancements with bus shelters, bus stops, so that we can restore dignity in riding buses and not have to stand in a ditch by the side of the road. I think we've seen some of those presentations where you have standing water or other unsafe and undesirable conditions in which to wait for your bus. So GRTC is focused on providing more of those. An issue has come up, though, on the fact that the city of Richmond or the county of Henrico own the property. So I don't know if we have a resolution about that, about GRTC installing their equipment that they have purchased onto property that doesn't belong to them. So that's an issue that's going to need addressing.
So I will speak candidly about shelters. It has required an increased coordination with VDOT since the majority of GRTC routes run on VDOT maintained roads. Within the city of Richmond, there is also some restrictions in terms of design. So we are trying to work with local assistance and from VDOT's perspective on how to streamline maybe doing kind of blanket approvals, because it is by case basis. So while you can have everything in line to be able to have the shelters, the benches, the trash cans, the concrete padding, it really is more of a stopgap with VDOT approving the designs for each of those concrete pads on the shelters alone. So, I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation that there was a lot of feedback saying that there needs to be better coordination between DRPT and VDOT, especially on more of those localized needs with the shelters. The other issue is that there is also, if there's federal funding, that there is a Section 106 requirement for shelters that gets involved that requires a historical analysis on the bus stop, whether it is kind of a rehab or a new stop that's being installed. And so some of those things that we have not accounted for, because a lot of our large urbans, their direct recipients usually will handle this bus stop amenities on their own. It is only been recently that they've been working with us to help expedite some of those processes. So with Section 106, you have to work with the Department of Historic Resources, and then therefore it requires another agency element that gets involved. So it all is to say that it is an issue because we know that the need is urgent and out there. But I will say that GRTC has been one of the lead agencies in kind of helping us be able to define a better process to kind of streamline some of these needs, especially from the VDOT perspective.
Janice, anything on chat from our viewers in regards to online questions, comments?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. A thought just came to me, Tiffany, as you invited the public to make comments on your website and on your email address. We are the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee. And I guess that sort of requires us or ask us to not only think about advising up to maybe the TPO, but also becoming more active in our other groups, such as the Virginia Transit Equity Committee, as they take surveys, et cetera, and take advantage of their websites and of their emails to give them some insight in regards to what we hear out there in the community in regards to equity and transportation. And that may be a real important opportunity for us as members around our table and in viewing to be more active in our advising position and taking responsibility to these other groups other than just the TPO. So closing comments from the chairman. Thank you, Tiffany. Appreciate all the work you've done. And there's been a lot of conversation around the table in regards to equity in a lot of different transportation arenas. And we thank you for your help and your activities in that regards.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Our next speaker will be Chet Parsons, who gives us an update on CVTA. Thank you, Chet.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. I will plan to give you some highlights and sorry, there we go. So I think everybody in the room is probably aware of the CVTA, but I wanted to give you a brief overview and then talk about where things stand today in terms of the CVTA and its next steps. So it was organized in August of 2020, so a little over a year ago. 9 jurisdictions, exact same footprint as Plan RVA. So you've got our 9 jurisdictions, plus you have membership from DRPT and VDOT. At the state level, you've got the Commonwealth Transportation Board. GRTC has a seat on the authority. We have 2 members of the General Assembly. So right now it's Senator Jennifer McClellan and Representative Doris McQuinn, the RMTA. And then as of July 1st of 2021, the Port of Virginia was added. So that took General Assembly action this past year. So that's the current authority makeup. The role of the authority is to administer funds that are collected from 2 different revenues. One is gas tax and sales tax is the second. And it can only be used for transportation purposes in our region, so that 9-county region. Revenues are dispersed according to 3 different categories, which I'll get into in the next few slides. And right now, the authority is advised by 2 standing committees, a finance committee and a technical committee. The technical committee functions in a very similar fashion to the technical committee that the TPO has. So, and many of the same members. So that's good to have that consistency across the board. Background on where things stand right now. So fiscal year 22, so what we are currently in from now until it ends June 30th, the revenues that are projected to be collected, remember it's gas tax, so it all depends on whether people travel or not, and sales. So right now, FY22 is projected to collect about $189 million for the region. And that grows slightly over the next 6 to 8 years, looking at forecasts. So that's a big number, and it's something that we haven't had before the CVTA was in existence. So there are 3 pots of funds. Well, I'll call them pots, and that's in the pie chart on the right side. The first is 50% of the revenues that are collected go back to the local member jurisdictions, and it's proportional to the taxes that were collected in those areas. So that can be used for anything that is transportation related that the local jurisdiction deems appropriate. So, for example, one of the larger jurisdictions may fund a intersection improvement or addition of bike lanes, or use it to leverage additional grant applications for bigger pots of money, like Smart Scale. Other jurisdictions already have used these funds to hire transportation staff. Some of the smaller jurisdictions don't have that staff capability, or didn't before this. So as long as the staff that's hired is used for transportation planning or engineering or other transportation related purposes, that's perfectly allowable according to the bylaws of the organization. So that's 50%. 35% is set aside for regionally significant projects. And I've got a lot more detail on that. And then the last 15% goes directly to GRTC on an annual basis for use in improving regional public transportation. It doesn't have to be fixed route service. It could be on-demand service. It could be other. Microtransit is a study that's going on right now that GRTC is spearheading. So lots of opportunities there over the next few years to think about public transportation on a regional scale. There is a focus right now on leveraging local dollars for larger investment. The 2 other authorities that exist in the state of Virginia, Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, both use their authorities to look at the debt market and leverage the funds that they raise to go out and take on debt and look at larger pots of money for things like the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is something that Hampton Roads is doing. And that's a whole different level. So the things the CVTA is supposed to do is prioritize projects on a regional scale, coming up with some type of data mechanism to prioritize and rank projects. There is a regional transit plan, public transportation plan, that is developed by GRTC that comes back to the CVTA for review and approval each year. Each jurisdiction oversees distribution of local funds, and then the CVTA can issue bonds as needed, as I mentioned. So if you look at the big picture, right now, the TPO has been around for a large amount of time. And the focus of the TPO is to generate the ideas and come up with a plan. Until now, once that plan is developed, it's been kind of a haphazard effort to go out and find ways to make the plan a real thing. Now that the CVTA is in place, that's that funding mechanism that can take the ideas that are developed in the plan that the TPO puts together and actually go out and say, yes, this is a priority for the region. We support it. We're going to allocate funds over a certain number of years to make this project a reality. And where we get at the end is, if everybody is at the same place and is talking to each other, it's a united project development process. So from idea to breaking ground. We have a way now to move through a collective process to collaborate and make transportation improvements a real thing. So the next few slides are just a quick update on where things are. The technical committee for the CVTA has proposed and the authority adopted a framework for scoring and ranking regional projects. And they focused on, they started with the same mechanisms that the TPO developed for Connect RBA 2045 in terms of project categories and ways to measure project impacts. What the CVTA did was reduce the number of measures that were considered. I believe for Connect RBA, we had 15 different performance measures to evaluate, and they reduced those to a handful. And those are in three broad categories: safety, mobility, and accessibility. And there are goal weights, percentages. That's what's on the screen now. So if you want more details on all of this, let me know later, and we can certainly have probably a 2-day conversation about performance measures. But that's the framework is now in place, and that's what is supposed to be followed to score and rank regionally significant projects. There is a process now that is in place where we have the performance measures, as I mentioned, are set up. There will be an annual process for member jurisdictions to submit an application for each particular project that they would like to be funded. The CVTA itself comes up with a draft funding scenario. Essentially, what are the budgets going to be each year? I talked about the expected revenues, the forecast. That's kind of this funding scenario. Coming up with revisions to that as needed. When you think about using CVTA dollars to go after smart scale money, or maybe at the federal level, you can use CVTA dollars to leverage a build grant or a Tiger grant, as they used to be called. So lots of different opportunities that are still way early to really narrow down. And then finally, adopt that funding scenario, document the commitments that the CVTA has for a set of projects each year, and start the process of moving forward and figuring out all the details. Who's going to administer the project? Is VDOT going to be involved? Is DRPT going to be involved as the project becomes a reality? All these different things that can happen. There are criteria for what's a regionally significant project. Excuse me. First of all, a highway project has to be an arterial or higher. So local roads, collector roads are not considered regionally significant. There are other ways to do that. Again, there's 50% revenues that go back to local governments. They can be used for those types of improvements. If it's a highway project, again, there has to be at least 20,000 vehicles per day on a given corridor. It could be a corridor of statewide significance, which Chris in the next presentation could probably talk a lot more about. And then it could also be on the arterial preservation network. So that shines a little bit more light on some of the outlying areas that may not be urban in nature, but still have roadways that could be categorized as regionally significant. And this was just the focus on highways, and that's the map that's on the screen, but there are other types of criteria for other regionally significant projects. Transit, bicycle pedestrian facilities, I believe parking rides has its own thing. Bridges could also be regionally significant. So lots of other things that are in the framework document itself. The timeline, this was just adopted last month in terms of how things move forward. And what you see on the screen is it's just a screen capture, but each one of those little blocks is an upcoming meeting of either the finance committee, the technical committee, or the full authority. And it has, here's what's supposed to happen at that meeting. So we've been able to work through the committee process and come up with an expectation of where things stand, because all of this fits into a larger picture. Smart scale applications open in March of 2022. So there are things that the authority needs to have done and ready in case a smart scale application wants to be considered. That's the pre-application window. The smart scale full applications open in June, I believe, and run through August. So we want to have all of the information available for our local elected officials to have the best information possible so they can make decisions about where they're going to put their money and what types of projects would be reasonable in terms of upcoming application cycles. The process itself, basically, a local government puts together a project application. We score and rank those project applications based on those measures, those performance measures that I mentioned earlier. We come up with planning level cost estimates. A lot of that is done in cooperation with VDOT or the member governments if they have those capabilities. We score the projects, looking at benefit and costs and those types of things that can stack up all the projects in a comparative basis, so you can compare like an intercity Richmond project to a rural Powhatan project and be able to come up with ways to think about those on the same page, and then come up with that funding plan and the actual allocations to move forward. I got through that as quickly as possible. I know there's lots of information that I didn't talk about, and you've all been engaged at one point or another in the CVTA process. So, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions. I know you have another presentation today, so if anybody has questions after the meeting or later on, I'd be happy to take them then too.
You've got a question over here.
I have a question, and my question is about funding for this big problem of transit. So you have transit, you have a stop, you have access to that stop. So presumably that's regional in nature. Let's say Route 250, Broad Street. You would be getting people from that locality to the stop on a bus, and lacking a sidewalk, they can't do that. So could you get funding? Now, Henrico, for example, would have to want to do this, but could Henrico apply, for example, to get funding through the CVTA to address this problem? I mean, of course, you have to collaborate, you have transit agencies and so forth, but is there a way to get funding for that, which may involve sidewalks, blah, blah, blah? Could you come up with something and get funded under the regionally significant projects?
Possibly. I think the sidewalks and the transit infrastructure, it depends on what the breadth of the project is. And if we're talking about a block's worth or filling a gap that's there right now, maybe a couple blocks of sidewalk or a bus stop or things like that, I think that the general recommendation would be to look at your local CVTA money to do those types of improvements. If we're looking at 5 miles of infrastructure that would get up there in terms of the dollar amounts and the impact to the neighboring communities, that could possibly be a regionally significant project. When we're looking at things like right now, one of the projects that is regionally significant could be the bus rapid transit corridor from downtown up to Ashland, or at least to Parham, maybe as a first step. That's something that would be much like the Pulse process was, where there's lots of different things that are engaged, and packaging all those different improvements together into one project would certainly be regionally significant. So I think it all depends on how it's packaged and what the need is presented in the application.
And so that, is there is that like highway? What category would that be under?
I would put all that under transit. It's all transit supportive infrastructure, including
like, quarter-mile sidewalks to reach.
Yeah, as long as it's on that transit corridor,
suburban,
and it provides a connection to the stops and the other resources.
Transit.
Yes,
but it wouldn't have to be.
Wouldn't have to be.
Wouldn't have to be.
No, could be anything.
It doesn't have to come out of that pot of money.
You have a question, Lisa?
Is there a chart somewhere on the CVTA site that shows how much funding each of the jurisdictions received out of that 189 million?
Yes, there is. And we actually have it broken down, and this is a lot. We have a working group made up of the finance directors for each of the jurisdictions. They've done an amazing job providing information on what's collected and what's forecast. So we can break it down by fiscal year in terms of the 3 pots, the 15, the 35, and the 50. We can also look at the local contributions in terms of what was collected in FY21 and what's forecast for future years. So there's lots of different ways to break down that information, and it is available.
Okay. And could you mention the public hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now, there is consideration by the authority for what to do with its first 2 years of funding. So what was actually collected in FY21 and what's forecast to be collected in FY22. As of this week, there is a list of potential projects that is published now for our December 3rd authority meeting. Yesterday we opened a public comment period, public review period, so that there will be a public hearing on December 3rd to say this list is the candidate list of projects for those first 2 years of funds. That is because that's not the way the CVTA would normally do things, but that is because there is such interest right now in the fall line that the authority, in full cooperation, decided they wanted to say that they are committed to the fall line and are willing to pull out those first 2 years to say these are the projects that we really want to look at right now. So the fall line and a couple other accompanying projects for those jurisdictions that aren't directly impacted by the fall line will be up for discussion at a public hearing on December 3rd. Following that meeting, if everything goes well, there will be a commitment to a list of projects that comes off of that candidate list by the authority for those first 2 years of funds, and a subsequent request to the Governor and General Assembly to consider all the remaining needs for those projects when they get into the next budget cycle. So it's a really, really exciting and kind of unified collaborative time right now when everybody is focused on getting this first kind of commitment out of the way and think about what happens next.
Michael?
Our governor-elect said he was going to scale back fuel taxes, gas taxes. Does that impact funding for?
We will see, but this was a General Assembly action. I guess they can, General Assembly can always scale back whatever they want. We hope it's not the case because we're showing more commitment and progress through our authority effort than Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia had in their first 2 years. So we feel pretty strongly that this is going to work and it's going to put us in a good position to get more funds in. Lisa may know more
That
than
I've heard about that pertain to the increase in the gas tax that took effect July 1st, 2021, to temporarily roll that back. That would mean about $200. So.
Was that for the CVTA?
No, for statewide.
Statewide. Okay.
So we'll see. That's what everybody seems to think he means by that, but just pay attention and see if more details will be forthcoming.
Of course, this leads us all to the discussion about how are electric vehicles going to share in the transportation funding or something like CVTA or others. We just had a young couple who live in Washington, D.C. who drove their Tesla down. $70,000, $80,000 vehicle, yet they're not contributing to the transportation costs that I know of.
They will.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this alternative fee they must pay.
Is there? Okay. So apparently that's taken into consideration. Okay. Any other questions, comments to Chet in regards to CVTA? Okay. Chris Wichman, hi. You're going to give us an overview of VTrans, if you would, please.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. Mr. Chair, can you confirm that you can see the screen?
I can confirm that, yes, sir.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Chris Wichman. It's good to be with you all today. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, and
Meeting on the 8th.
And my purpose today really is just to provide you all with an overview of VTrans, which is Virginia's statewide transportation plan. So this is very similar to, with the RRTPO engaging in the long-range transportation planning process. the Commonwealth Transportation Board undertakes a similar process, and that is VTrans. So today I really want to just provide you all with an update. We may not have time to go through the entirety of this effort. We kicked off the most recent updated VTrans back in 2018. So what I want to do today is really focus on kind of what's significant. How does VTrans affect planning and programming of transportation dollars in the Commonwealth? And then really try to direct you all to some resources and ways to, find out more on, on your own time and after this meeting. So in terms of VTrans, there's really 4 pillars or 4 major components of the planning process. So the first is the CTB establishing a vision, goals, and objectives. And this was all done really through a collaborative process with the board back in 2019, and then adopted a set of vision, goals, and objectives by the board in January of 2020. So the first pillar is sort of completed work. And then moving to the second pillar, we could also consider that to be something that is complete / ongoing. And that's the identification and prioritization of midterm needs. So thinking about needs with respect to VTrans, this is really like a problem identification. Where do we have congestion issues, safety issues? Where do we have problems on our network in Virginia? And then not only identifying those, but then sort of comparing all those issues to one another and coming up with some way to prioritize those needs. So how these are important, you can see the arrow below pillar 2 leading down to a few icons. So one way that the VTrans midterm needs are used is as a screening criteria for smart scale. So for a local government or regional entity to apply for a project in the smart scale, they must show how that project will meet a VTrans need. So if Henrico County wants to build or improve an intersection, they must show how that's going to address some safety or congestion need that's been identified through VTrans. For example, as well as VDOT's revenue sharing program includes consideration of the VTrans midterm needs as part of their screening and eligibility process. And then finally, sort of the newest emerging way that the VTrans midterm needs are used is a new concept called the project pipeline. So this is something that the CTB put into policy in March of 2021. And the concept here is that as VDOT and DRPT and other state agencies sort of allocate study funds, what are we going to study with sort of the scarce planning resources that the state has, making sure that those studies are aligning to where we have the highest priority needs. So that's sort of the significance in how VTrans affects some of the planning and programming processes. The third and fourth pillars here are sort of more current and ongoing, and things that you'll be seeing at December's CTB meeting, and that's the long-term risk and opportunity register, and then strategic actions. So I'll have some slides and kind of give a little bit of detail on this, but again, I'll most likely direct you to some resources that you can dig into these a little bit more. So I mentioned the vision, goals, and objectives. Again, these were approved and added to the policy by the CTB back in 2020. I won't go through all of these, but it's important to note that these goals, sort of drove the process and the technical work that was used to identify needs. So the midterm needs, really we're trying to address each of these goals. How do we reduce congestion or improve accessibility or improve safety? So all the work that was done to analyze the network and establish our midterm needs were sort of based on the goals and objectives. So the view here of the map is actually, if you go to our website, vtrans.org, we have a tool, and it's called Interact VTrans, and it's a mapping application that you can use to sort of navigate and review all the midterm needs that have been established, down to the segment by segment basis. You can zoom into your neighborhood and look at your local streets and understand what the state has identified as sort of the needs for that particular segment of roadway are. So it's a very detailed analysis that was done across a number of different categories of needs, and was done statewide. So this process is something that we will continue to update on a 2 to 4 year process. And again, the significance of this is that it is used for eligibility criteria for smart scale, to get projects funded. In addition to identifying needs, we went through a process to prioritize the needs, and we really did that at 2 different scales. So prioritization took place at the statewide level, where we looked at primarily the corridors of statewide significance, and Chet sort of alluded to those in his presentation. So these are really the major, connecting corridors for inter-regional and interstate travel, and they're multimodal. So it's not just the highway; it's also considering the needs of rail as part of these. So the midterm prioritization looked at the statewide level, and again, the significance of these is that for DRPT, VDOT to study, do a planning study or project development, they must show some connection to the prioritized VTrans needs. And then just to build on that, the prioritization was also done at the regional level or the construction district level. And again, you can explore the results of all this through our website and Interact VTrans. So some of the new, more emerging work that's being done is a look, sort of beyond 10 years. All the midterm needs work is really looking at kind of the next 10 years, where should we be investing, having projects and investing in some solutions. With the long-term risk and opportunity register, this is really a tool to kind of try to look at things where we may have some uncertainties. So not only do we want to look at risks where there's a possible future scenario where there may be some negative outcome, we also want to look at opportunities where there could be something changing that could, we could sort of leverage into some sort of positive outcome. So that's the idea behind the long-term risk and opportunity register. And to do this, we looked at mega trends and then macro trends. So mega trends would be sort of just the large social, political, or environmental things happening in the world that are really outside of state government's control, right? Like, the General Assembly can't control how technology advances or how the climate changes or how consumption patterns change or how we're aging and our employment. The types of employment that are most prevalent are changing. These are things that are sort of outside of government control. But then when you get into the macro trends, this is where we can sort of have some interventions potentially, based on what we're seeing in different scenarios of maybe low, medium, and high, whether it's adoption of electric vehicles or, increases in these flooding risks, how we can have some, intervention in policy or in how we're doing business that could help us to address the problem. So that's sort of the concept here. I won't go into a great deal of detail, although there is a great deal of detail that's been to this work, and that's available again through our website and some of the resources that we provided. So how are we using this information? So one of the outputs, I guess, of this process is an understanding of how these macro trends can sort of map to our transportation system and how we can sort of track those things over time. So for each macro trend, like the first example here is the flooding risk macro trends. We are establishing trend trackers where, year by year, we can, look at the number of directional miles of roadways that are at risk from sea level rise, based on sort of rerunning this analysis. And in this way, we can be providing the Commonwealth Transportation Board with up-to-date and current information on sort of where things stand. I think the chair alluded to the market penetration of electric vehicles and, what that impact could be on how we sort of generate revenues. So understanding those market penetration rates and when policy intervention may be necessary is an important part of this. So the VTrans trend trackers that are being established through the long-term risk and opportunity register are sort of the mechanism to think about some of those things. And this is just some of the additional trends that are going to be tracked, having to do with, the types of employment. Obviously, the aging population is an important issue and has some impact on transportation. So I blew through those. Again, I would direct you all to vtrans.org and our long-term risk and opportunity register page for more information. So finally, the fourth pillar that I mentioned earlier in the presentation is the strategic actions. So these are a set of, sort of what to do, I guess you could say, that the Commonwealth Transportation Board is considering. And it's sort of the capstone of the VTrans planning process. We went through the process of establishing vision, goals, and objectives, looking at our needs in the next 10 years for the network, establishing how to understand trends. And then finally, the idea with the strategic actions is, what should we do? So this is very much an action-oriented set of, list of recommendations. And as I mentioned, the Commonwealth Transportation Board will be taking a look at these as part of their December meeting. In terms of resources that you can look at, we really have two types of documents. One is our policy guide, which sort of includes all the things that the CTB has adopted as it relates to VTrans. So, I mentioned the vision, goals, and objectives, how we establish midterm needs, how we establish the long-term risks and opportunities. So all those things are captured in the policy guide. And then for those who want to really dive in and understand, the technical methods, we've also worked up these technical guides, which get into data sources, methods used, so that maybe a regional entity or a local government can sort of copy or mimic some of the techniques that the state is using for some of this work. So I blew through all that information, but I do want you to leave, I guess, with some other things to look at. So our website is really our best resource. And I mentioned Interact VTrans, which is our mapping application that allows you to really explore a lot of different data. And there's also a data explorer element of that where you can actually, look at non-mapping data as well. So we'll be coming out with more tutorials and things on how to use that tool and make it a little bit more approachable. But it's really, very powerful. We also, accept emails at any time. If you email this comment at vtrans.org, it'll be one of our staff will respond to you. It won't be an automated robot response or something like that. So that's a good way to reach one member of our team. We also have newsletters that we send out on a quarterly basis, and you can sign up for those on our website. And as always, connect with us on social media. Whenever we do public meetings or presentations to the board, we try to alert folks through social media of that. I went pretty fast. I'm happy to answer any questions, though. I didn't really talk about the background of what we've done or who we are, but I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Any questions? Janice, anybody online?
No, I don't have anything.
Chris, thank you very much. Very informative. I happen to be a visual learner, and those maps of the state and showing the traffic concentrations in the different metropolitan areas was very powerful to me. And if I recall correctly, you said you can go into that site and drill down to more local information, and I'm assuming there will be a sidebar of some sort that would give you more information about traffic in your locality. I live in Ashland, so that would be interesting to me as I go to our town council and talk about traffic impacts in regards to the town of Ashland.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're seeing the map now. I just pulled it onto my desktop. So it's moving a little slow because I have a lot of things running on the machine right now. But yeah, with this tool, you can go and sort of zoom in on your local area. And like I mentioned, so if we went up to Ashland here, it's going slow because I'm running. Oh, this is in Ashland. But for example, you can select a given segment and understand quite a bit of different information about what needs are established for this given segment. So you would know, does the state consider this to be a congestion hotspot, safety? And so we have all these different need categories, and you can look at those through this tool. You can also, and I don't want to go into too much detail on this because we could, again, spend all day, but you can actually search to a specific area. So if you're only interested in, say, the town of Ashland, let's see. Oh, I have that city and county. Okay, I'm going to pick Hanover County as an example because I didn't pick town as my, but you can search for these things for a given geography. So if I want to know where all the V-Trans needs are in Hanover County, for example, that are congestion, or no, let's say safety. I can search those in this tool as well. So there's some robust capabilities in this that we really want folks to be able to kind of use it to understand what's going on the network. So if you all run into any issues in using this or have any other questions, you can send them to us at that comment email address.
That to me is a great resource for any of us who are interested in transportation. Getting all of that information from statewide perspective, that's great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for your department.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Appreciate it.
Any questions, comments, Chris? Okay. Thank you all presenters. Excellent information. We do thank you for spending that time with us. Future meeting topics, I draw your attention to page 10 of our agenda, which gives our different meeting topics. And I'll let Ken comment on a couple of thoughts and changes in regards to what we normally see on meeting topics.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And first of all, this is our last meeting for 2021, so wish everybody good holidays coming up. For January of 2022, we'll continue with having essentially 3 shorter topics, presentations that maybe aren't necessarily related to each other. But going forward from there, what we are proposing is that for the remaining meetings in 2022 is to have a single topic and have a more in-depth discussion and hopefully have some interactivity amongst the committee members, some give and take, some in-depth discussion on particular topics. You'll notice that, for example, for March of 2022, we are proposing to have a discussion around our Plan 2050. I know everybody's probably exhausted from Connect RVA 2045, so we'll let you catch your breath for a month or two, but now we're going to dive right into Plan 2050. And we're hoping that the pandemic will be in the rearview mirror in the coming months, and that we can have some better public engagement, better public involvement, and in particular this group and other groups as far as helping us work through the development of Plan 2050. So we're going to devote the March meeting to that topic. Hopefully by May, we'll know about the Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization and more about transportation funding. I think there's been some questions about how does the funding flow? How does all that work out? So we'll have a workshop on that in May. Other topics, GRTC, the Greater Washington Partnership, which is a sort of a super regional partnership. And then wrapping up the year, we propose to have a presentation on regional trails, bicycle and pedestrian safety. So that's what we have. These are all subject to change, of course, and would welcome any other suggestions for topics. I have a few ideas listed there that are scheduled, but not, as potentials. But if you have some other topics that you would like for us to address, we can certainly explore that.
Thank you, Ken. The thought process was that while at these meetings, we tend to get very informative and very top-level information about transportation. Sometimes there just isn't any time with the limited schedule that we have for us to dive in deep enough to talk about issues. So the thought is we'd start going with themes and have one good conversation, give enough time for enough feedback so that we walk away with our burning comments being heard and also being educated. In regards to that, I do suggest that when you take a look at our upcoming meetings, that you take an opportunity to talk with folks in the community about what their hot buttons are about these particular subjects. So we'll give you a forum to talk about those. Also talk with your alternate. That's sort of a hint. Talk to your alternate, and maybe y'all can get together from time to time and be prepared to address some local impact and give us input for these meetings. And if you have any other hot buttons that you want to be discussed, always there's the opportunity to change our, to the extent possible, change our meeting subject. Things will change, that type of thing. So let the staff here know, or let me know as to any of the hot buttons that you feel appropriate that we might discuss in our meetings. Any comments about the future meeting topics? Okay, any member comments? Virginia, if you're still out here, this is your opportunity to make additional comments if you'd like. Or we would challenge Sarah to take over your spot. Yes, Michael.
I want to call everybody's attention to an email that I hope you will be getting. I'm going to ask staff to forward a program announcement that will be taking place virtually on December 9th. The Virginia Rail Policy Institute, they are partnering with Virginians for High-Speed Rail to put on a symposium, how to protect underutilized rail lines and abandoned rail corridors for future rail use and create wonderful rail trails. We're very focused in this group about trails, particularly in this region, the Fall Line Trail. There are rail corridors all over the state that are either underutilized or already abandoned, and people are just itching to put bicycle and multi-use pedestrian facilities on the rights of way. And at the same time, the rail community is aware that rail transportation is being rediscovered as a mode for shouldering future responsibilities for both freight and for passenger rail. And a corridor is really hard to assemble in today's world. Now, the low-hanging fruit for trail people for the last half century, well, since the railroad industry downsizing began after World War II, has just been to put trails on old right-of-ways. And we're thinking that the downsizing of our rail network is about to reverse course. And the Rail Policy Institute is recommending to state rail planners, particularly the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, that the state be given first right of refusal for rail corridors that are about to be cast off by the so-called mainstream rail companies. And or if they are indeed abandoned, that if a trail is established on a right-of-way, a railroad right-of-way, that it does not preclude the reintroduction of rail service. And frequently this will mean you leave the track in place and put a rail trail beside it. So to wrap all of that up, we're having a program. It's going to be presented by Kelly Peck, who is Senior Director of Trail Development for the Rails to Trails Conservancy, and Andrea Furster, who is the attorney for that same organization. And they're going to talk about all of the examples across the country where rail trails or rails with trails are being successfully developed. Even where a railroad had been abandoned, they're putting it back and yet maintaining a trail as well. So we're going to learn all about that. We're going to learn about rail banking. We're going to learn about first right of refusal policy that Virginia may want to undertake. So be on the lookout for an email with that program announcement. Again, it's December 9th. It's about a 1-hour webinar starting at 1.
Starting at what time? 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. I see Ken and Janice taking copious notes, and I'm sure.
I'll be forwarding that to you.
All right, thank you.
So we'll be getting information about
Hope
that.
everybody in the MPO gets it as well as just our little.
Well, I want it before I get home today. Come on, Michael. Thank you.
I
Thank
print
you
it
all.
out in the office.
Freddie?
Michael, it's very good to hear about having rails and trails running together. That's very good idea.
Well, my police chief in Ashland has a fit when we put trails and rails together, because he's always anxious about the two actually physically overlapping. And in downtown Ashland, that sometimes with our train day and other activities around the rails, and people aren't protected. And
Through Ashland, you can detour the trail part. Would not be a problem.
over the Fall Line Trail, the beginnings of. Well, thank you all for attending, both physically and virtually. I will wish you happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas. Our next meeting is January the 20th, and I hope that you all have a great holiday season. Thank you for attending. Meeting's adjourned.
I couldn't understand.
Just